Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you. Running a little bit late this morning, but anyway, trying to get everything done. I'm so far behind from being gone down to Victoria, Texas. By the way, had a really fantastic time in Victoria, Texas. I was looking to see some of you down there. Missed you, and you missed a really good conference. And by the way, the plans are that the presentations that I gave there at Victoria this last weekend, March 16th through the 18th, will be put on YouTube so that you can watch them. So I'll be making the announcement of that, but it'll be a little bit. The guy who did the filming is in the process of processing the video as I speak. Well, we are in the midst of a thematic study of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We've been taking a look at the fact that Paul uses the present passive indicative or the present active indicative to speak of the resurrection. And I've been pointing out the implications of that and what that would mean. And I've been giving the supportive evidence for that. I've taken note of the fact that many of the world's greatest Greek scholars have and do struggle with the reality of the present passive indicatives in 1 Corinthians 15. While some scoffers want to just wave their hand at the present passives and say, well, they don't mean anything at all, some of the greatest scholars in the world do struggle with it. And they do comment that it's a very difficult thing. So it seems almost trivial to me, pardon me, when you have some of the world's greatest Greek scholars saying these present passive indicatives are a problem. By the way, Thistleton in the New International Greek Testament Commentary, this set that's right behind me here, he struggles with the present passive indicatives. He acknowledges their reality. He acknowledges the problem. He tries to explain the problem. And then we have people who, like myself, are not Greek scholars, and they tell us, oh, well, you don't have to pay any attention to them. Yeah, I think we do. Now, there are some very serious attempts to explain them away. Some have more validity than others, but it seems to me that in the final analysis, that we are forced, when we compile all of the evidence, when we look at the context itself of 1 Corinthians 15, that we are forced to the position that the resurrection was in fact already underway, which falsifies the idea that Paul is talking about a physical resurrection. Now, I want to point out, I received one objection, and I want to address this here because evidently the objection was shared by several people. One objector said, in order for the pardon me, in order for the present passive indicatives to be considered as valid, you would have to have Paul saying, and speaking of past resurrection, present resurrection, and then future. Now, that was given as a valid argument against taking the present passive indicatives as valid. Let me make a couple of observations here. Point number one, let me reiterate, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I can certainly read the Greek scholars, and I can read the grammars, and I can read the lexicons and what have you. And guess what? I have never in my life heard of a Greek rule, maybe I'm just ignorant, okay? But I've never heard of a Greek grammar, a rule of grammar that said in order for a present tense verb to be taken as a present tense, you have to then have a past of that same subject and a future of that same subject. I've never heard of such a rule. And oh, by the way, I converse and I correspond with some really excellent Greek scholars. And I shared this objection with some of them, and they likewise had never heard of such a rule of Greek grammar. The second point, however, let's just say, for argument's sake, that there's some validity. Let's just say that you have to have a past, then a present, and then a future. Well, guess what? We've got exactly and precisely that thing in that same pattern in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul wrote to the Corinthians and said he had preached the gospel to them. They received the gospel, past tense, and it was by that gospel that they were being present, active, indicative, well, present, passive, indicative, being saved. Oh, but what were they doing? They were looking for their future salvation at the resurrection. So what do we find? We have the past, when they accepted the gospel, and doesn't everybody agree that accepting the gospel of Christ, as I pointed out in the last video, I mean, after all, so many people point to Romans chapter 6 and say, oh yes, indeed, that's a spiritual resurrection. Okay, then in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 1 and 2, we have a past resurrection. And an ongoing. You are being saved. Well, if their past resurrection was their past salvation, and if their present being saved is to be an equivalency, then guess what? We have a past and we have a present, and then of course we have the future. And thus every, quote, requirement by this so-called objection is fulfilled. Pardon me. I had a terrible time with reflux yesterday, and it had some effect on my voice. But notice what else we have in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul said Christ already had, past tense, put all things under his feet. Had put all things under his feet. Not only that, he was a present infinitive ruling. Well, that ruling is the process of putting everything under his feet. Pardon me. Boy. And then he would, future tense, put all things under his feet. Now, the focus of that past, present, and future is without any doubt whatsoever the resurrection of Christ, right? He has put all things under his feet. How did he do it? Resurrection. He was then currently, as the resurrected Lord, ruling and reigning. He must continue to reign, present infinitive. And he will, future tense, put all things under his feet. So this so-called objection that we have to have a past in order to honor a present in the context of a future, even though it is a totally specious argument, but even if one granted the argument, guess what? It's right there in the text of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Look, if you want a tremendous discussion of the resurrection, get my book, The Resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, Future or Fulfilled. It is over 400 pages of a discussion of the resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, demonstrating, number one, that it lies behind and serves as a source for 1 Corinthians 15, and number two, that it posits that resurrection in AD 70 without any doubt whatsoever. Go to my website, BibleProphecy.com or eschatology.org, order the book, send me an email or a note that says you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund your shipping. Well, we have more on whether or not the resurrection of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 was already underway, and we'll get to that on the flip side. We'll see you there.